and welcome to another round of the public sector debate competition. We are now at the octafinals. That is the round of 16 teams. I'm Tamika Godmighty, communication specialist here in the Transformation Implementation Unit and your host for this match. We are happy that you've joined us, whether here at 6 Saxthorpe Avenue or online on our social media platforms. Over the next 2 days, the top 16 teams will battle it out in this octafinal round for a spot in the quarterfinals. So 16 will become 8. It has been a great competition so far, and we want to commend all the teams that have showed up and represented their organizations. At the end of the preliminary round, we said farewell to 6 teams, and we would like to thank them for their participation. If you missed the action in that round, remember you can catch up on the exciting matches either on our Facebook page or on our YouTube channel. For this match today, we have with us the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade and the National Environment and Planning Agency, and they will be debating the MOOT. Be it resolved that the Sex Offender Registry should be made fully accessible to the public. Very interesting, serious MOOT. I know we're all excited to get the match started, but before we do so, we'll have the teams introduce themselves, beginning with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade.
Good morning. Is it on? Good morning. My name is Celia Cunningham, and I will be the first speaker for the proposition.
Good morning. My name is Victoria Brim, and I will be the reply speaker for the proposition.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Shelley McIntosh, and I'm the second speaker.
Thank you so much to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade. Now we turn our attention to the National Environment and Planning Agency while they introduce themselves.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Michaela Miller-Colley, and I'll be the first opposition speaker.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sabrina Orabano. I will be the second opposition speaker.
Good morning, Camille Douglas Stevenson, and I'll be the third opposition speaker.
Thank you so much to Team National Environment and Planning Agency. Thank you, teams. Now today, our adjudication for debating and empowerment Jade. We'll have our adjudicators introduce themselves.
Pleasant morning all. My name is Javon Downey and I'll be serving as the chair adjudicator for this match.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Roshana Jarrett, and I'll be your wing adjudicator for this match.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Ravon Thomas Matthews, and I'll be your second wing adjudicator for this match.
Thank you. Everyone has introduced themselves, and the teams are familiar with the rules. So I now turn over to the judges. All the best to both teams.
All right. Thank you very much, Tamika. At this stage in the competition, I am assuming all the teams are familiar and au fait with the rules. So without further ado, let's get straight into it. We now welcome the first speaker and side proposition. Here.
If your neighbor were a convicted sex offender, wouldn't you want to know? Mr. Speaker, judges, opponents, audience, good day. Today, the proposition firmly supports the motion, be it resolved that that the Sex Offender Registry, should be made fully accessible to the public. Allow us to first define some key terms of this motion. The Department of Correctional Services of Jamaica defines a sex offender as any person who has been convicted of offenses specified in the Sexual Offences Act, including rape, incest, grievous sexual assault, amongst others. It also takes into account some specific crimes listed in the Trafficking in Persons Act, the Offenses Against the Person Act, and the Child Care and Protection Act. The Sex Offender Registry refers to the register as maintained under Section 29 of the Sexual Offences Act. Fully accessible means the registry is no longer confidential, but accessible by the public through government websites or designated government offices. The public includes all citizens, including parents, school administrators, youth group leaders, and community members. This proposal is urgent as Jamaica is facing a national emergency of sexual violence. If we speak of just child victims, the Jamaica Constabulary Force reports that between January 2023 and May 12, 2025, over 3,000 sexual offenses have been carried out against over 2,100 children. Too often, offenders who have been convicted and served their sentence re-enter society quietly, taking up jobs, moving into neighborhoods, or working near schools without anyone knowing. This must not continue, and so we'll present our case as follows. We'll explain how the Sex Offender Registry should be made fully accessible to the public, show how it protects citizens by helping prevent repeat offenses, explain how it promotes transparency and public confidence in the justice system. Our second speaker will discuss the deep psychological and social consequences of sexual violence and show how the registry deters potential offenders. And our third speaker will reinforce these arguments with new examples and address the opposition's key concerns. Mr. Speaker, I want to make it absolutely clear that our team is not proposing reckless free-for-all access. We are proposing a structured, responsible, and lawful public registry. So, how would it work? Currently, the registry is by law secret and confidential, with only a select few, including police and institutions, able to request access by writing to the Commissioner of Corrections. But the average citizen, locked out. But this doesn't have to be the case. Our sister nation, Trinidad and Tobago, took the bold step in 2019 to amend legislation allowing for the publishing of a sex offender website, publicly making available information relating to convicted sex offenders such as names, aliases, type of offense, date of conviction, and locality, with a stern warning as to the legal implications of misuse of the information. Why then is Jamaica still keeping our citizens in the dark? Under our proposal, similar to what was carried out by Trinidad and Tobago, we would amend the Sexual Offences Act and regulations to make the register no longer confidential. But in addition to this, we would require persons requesting access to self-identify with their name and TRN and complete a terms and conditions agreement explicitly prohibiting misuse of the information. This would be utilized in the event of investigating suspected abuse of the program, such as harassing, intimidating, or attacking an offender, actions which would carry strict legal consequences, and with sensitization campaigns to educate the public on the responsible use of the registry, we would emphasize that it is a safety tool and not a weapon. A public sex offender registry aids in the prevention of sexual crimes. Right now, disclosure of the registry is limited to parties with legitimate interests, such as law enforcement or potential employers. But what of the concerns of ordinary citizens, such as parents or a student traveling alone who simply want to know the potential threats around them? Consider the case of Shadane Harris, a serial sex offender convicted in 2022 of 6 counts of rape, 4 counts of grievous sexual assault, amongst other crimes. Harris pleaded guilty to these acts he committed between 2014 and 2019, a period during which he worked nights as a taxi operator. One of his victims was an amputee, another a senior citizen. Imagine Harris, after serving time, being released into society to the ignorance of community members. By making the registry responsibly accessible, citizens would feel empowered to take proactive steps to safeguard their homes, schools, and communities from the Harrises of Jamaica. Mr. Speaker, a public sex offender registry also strengthens public trust in the justice system, not by extending punishment, but by reinforcing accountability and transparency after conviction. While conviction and sentencing represent justice served for past actions, true public confidence requires ongoing protection after the sentence ends. Many Jamaicans feel that the justice system is slow, closed off, or unresponsive. But a public sex offender registry assures citizens that successful reintegration isn't a gamble left to chance, but a process supported by monitoring, transparency, and public awareness. Citizens can then feel more encouraged to report incidents, and the enforcement of strict rules about misuse of the information shows the system values both public safety and due process. Mr. Speaker, this debate is not just about policy. It's about protection, justice, and national healing. We are proposing a system that gives Jamaicans the information they need, safeguards against misuse, and finally bridges the gap between conviction and community safety. We cannot continue to hide the truth from the very people most affected by it. And so we urge this House to support this motion. Thank you.
We thank the first proposition speaker for opening the debate on that side of the House, and now we will welcome the first opposition speaker to do likewise. Hear, hear.
Years of data shows that public sex offender registries do not work and result in no change in sexual offenses. Reoffending rates stand as high as 40%. Adjudicators, proponents, ladies and gentlemen, greetings. The opposition has the tremendous burden of opposing the MOOT, be it resolved that the Sex Offender Registry should be made fully accessible to the public. For us, key terms are full access, which is defined as no restriction or no exceptions, while the public is defined as ordinary people, the community, anyone, or everyone. Let it be explicitly clear that the opposition has zero sympathy for criminals. We are not arguing for the protection of offenders. Rather, our argument is that there is no real value in making the Sex Offender Registry fully accessible to the public, as the cost gravely outweighs the benefit. I would love to see the register public, but as an ordinary citizen, I can't do anything with names and addresses. Proposition may disagree, but the only benefits, ladies and gentlemen, the register hold is to, 1, keep the public aware, and 2, where you suspect or witness a reoffense, you can inform the police. We, the opposition, therefore strongly oppose the motion that the Sex Offender Registry should be made fully accessible to the public. This is a band-aid approach to more deep-seated societal issues that exist in Jamaica today. Now, even if we make the register public, what will it change? Will it cause sexual reoffending rates to plummet? Will it change the criminal mind of offenders? Will it change our culture of deviance? Sex offender registries are restricted to the public globally and are only fully accessible in the US, South Korea, and the Maldives. Governments must weigh the costs and benefits of making such a pertinent decision that
Point
will
of information.
impact, not accepted, the social and economic welfare of its citizens. If the cost, ladies and gentlemen, think about it, outweighs the benefits of making such a pertinent decision that will impact the social and economic welfare of citizens, it will not be taken. Ultimately, the safety and welfare of the public is priority. This policy has more cost than benefits and inevitably leads to vigilantism, misinformation, no change in repeat offenses,
Point of
a false
information.
sense of security not accepted, and is counterproductive to rehabilitation and law enforcement efforts. That is 5 costs to the 2 benefits that I mentioned earlier. As opposed to making the registry public, we are proposing to maintain a restricted access registry, introduce stricter and radical penalties for sexual offenses, and employ rehabilitation models for our prison systems, like Finland's that has achieved a 1% reoffending rate.
Point of information.
Not accepted. We are also proposing increased minimum sentences from 15 to 25 years with the inclusion of the death penalty, similar to countries like India, China, and Pakistan. These measures will ensure that safety and welfare of all Jamaicans is upheld. Ladies and gentlemen, as first speaker, I will discuss 3 costs of accepting the motion. Not accepted: badgering judges, false sense of security, misinformation, 3, and counterproductivity. Our second speaker will follow suit to discuss the remaining 2 costs, namely vigilantism and the impact on repeat offender rates. Our third speaker will concretize our argument. Firstly, the Sex Offender Registry public, the Sex Offender Registry public, making the Sex Offender Registry public gives a false sense of security. Protecting citizens is the government's responsibility, not the public. Trained professionals like the Commissioner of Corrections are tasked with managing the registry under the Sexual Offences Act, which limits access to law enforcement and other officials. Public access to the registry effectively turns ordinary people into untrained enforcers, risking due process and promoting violent retributions. This shifts the responsibility to those unequipped to handle such matters safely and effectively. The tragic case of Kelsey Farragon illustrates that public knowledge of a sex offender identity does not guarantee action or prevention. In her case, the offender was known to the community, yet no one intervened. The real failure was in the justice system that granted bail and released the offender without mandatory rehabilitation.
Point of information.
Not accepted. This shows that a public registry alone would not have prevented it, even with the mechanisms you mentioned. Jamaican people, regardless of whatever law, if they know that they were a victim, they must come feel. Secondly, public sex offender registries come with drawbacks such as misinformation. The public is generally unequipped to interpret this sensitive information, resulting in fear and even violent crimes. Finally, public sex offender registries hinder both law enforcement and rehabilitation by driving offenders into homelessness and non-compliance, making them more difficult to monitor. These serious drawbacks, the false security, misinformation, reduced effectiveness, far outweigh the limited benefits of public awareness. We therefore urge this noble house to reject the motion in favor of more effective solutions such as stricter penalties, mandatory rehabilitation, and a more robust justice system that truly protects the safety and well-being of all Jamaicans. The opposition rests.
So we thank the opposition first speaker for an equally spirited opening on that side of the House. We will now transition into our first period of cross-examination, where we invite the opposition team to pose 3 questions to proposition, questions limited to 10 seconds and responses capped at 30 seconds, after which we'll flip the arrangement and invite proposition to pose questions to opposition. Opposition, you're up.
Thank you. Proposition. Can you name one peer-reviewed study or empirical data that proves public sex offender registries reduce the rate of sexual abuse or sexual crimes?
Yes, J.J. Patterson in the Cato Institute stated that public sex offender registries actually serve to prevent or deter first-time offenses.
Since over 90% of child sexual abuse cases are committed by someone known to the child, how exactly will a public registry prevent first-time crime?
Once again, knowing that if convicted, your face, name, and locality will be published online for all of Jamaica to see, would it serve as a deterrent for first-time offenders, as supported by peer-reviewed papers.
And it also helps communities to protect themselves. If they know that offenders exist, they can use the information to take necessary precautions to kind of tailor their interactions with them.
Proposition, you argue public access increases safety. Then why has the U.S. seen no consistent decrease in sex crimes despite 20 plus years of public registries?
There has been a 10% decrease in sex offenders' crimes with the use of registries, and that is with rehabilitation as opposed to 13% without. And those figures may sound minimal, but they, if you can save one life, that is more than enough. Knowledge is information.
All right. We thank.
Furthermore, in the United States, it's proven that the registries are far more effective when coupled with notification systems that notify citizens when a sex offender is in their community.
Thank you very much, opposition, for your questions. Now we invite proposition to pose questions to opposition.
Can you speak to the effectiveness of just jail time and rehabilitation in reducing the rate of sexual violence in Jamaica?
Proposition, the challenge that we have is that Jamaica has not actually been collecting the data. What's that?
So we're just saying not to press the mic every time that you're speaking. Once it's on, just leave it on and continue. So you'll restart your time to respond.
Sure. You want to ask a question again?
Can you speak to the effectiveness of just jail time and rehabilitation in reducing the rate of sexual violence in Jamaica?
Yes, we were just saying that what we have recognized is that Jamaica has not been adequately tracking and keeping count of all of the statistics. 40% has been quoted by the Department of Correctional Services, but there is not a thorough breakdown of that percentage. So that data is not in existence for Jamaica. What we do know is that it is a guarantee for countries such as Finland and Japan, where their educational systems and prevention is helping to alleviate that problem.
But again, different context, different society, different cultural.
And who exactly are we protecting by keeping the registry private?
Everyone. We're looking at the families of persons who are known to have persons of who are on the sex offenders list, have been having cases where they can be left for mob justice, for vigilantism, you name it. It doesn't protect anyone except for, we're not even sure at this point. The victims need protection. The families of the sex offenders also need protection.
Can you state, sorry.
Yeah. Go ahead, it's your final question.
Okay. Can you give us one example of a case where vigilantism was performed against a person that had already been convicted and served their time?
Gladly proposition. So in Jamaica in 2008, there was a man who was on trial for a different offense. He was a previous offender and he was attacked by a group of men, shot dead, and they wrote raper on his chest. That was an act of vigilantism,
But that's,
2008.
yeah, no, that doesn't answer the question. Okay.
All right. Thank you, teams. But just remember that when you're either side responds, you're not allowed to respond. Yes, so keep it moving. All right. So thank you for a first interesting period of cross-examination. We'll continue the debate with the submission from the second proposition speaker.
Brutal, horrific, traumatic, devastating. These are the words used by victims of sexual offenses to describe the profound physical and emotional effects suffered by the experience. Members of the House, it is for this reason why we support the MOOT to make the Sex Offender Registry fully accessible to the public. According to Statin, between 2018 and 2022, there were 9,212 sexual offenses committed in Jamaica. Further, Sissoko stated between January 2023 and May 2025, there were 3,014 reported offenses against children. These figures represent violated lives, stolen childhoods, and profound trauma inflicted on our most vulnerable. Sexual offenses against anyone are heinous, and many cases go unreported due to shame, guilt, and fear of reprisals. Granting full public access to the Sex Offender Registry may empower victims to speak out, increasing offender accountability and public identification, particularly in light of the low conviction rates for these crimes. This will hopefully break the cultural beliefs held by some perpetrators who feel rape is just a little sex. In the age of data protection laws and human rights, it may sound drastic to publicly share the Sex Offender Registry. However, let me ask you, wasn't it drastic when 9-year-old Kelsey Kerrigan was raped in St. Catherine by a sexual predator recently released from jail, killed and dumped in a barrel? Wasn't it drastic when at 23 years, Sharika had already been raped 5 times, with the first incident being at 9 years by her father? Wasn't it drastic when 4 women were sexually abused by a serial rapist over a 4-day period, with the mother of 2 of the victims forced to watch? Sexual crimes, often premeditated and targeting vulnerable individuals, especially children, have severe physical, psychological, and economic impacts on victims. These include injuries, STDs, mental health disorders, and financial strain on both individuals and the state. In 1991, the Jamaican government covered 90% of the US $454,000 in medical expenses for some of these victims at the Kingston Public Hospital. Given the alarming rate of sexual offenses, the right to privacy is not absolute and must be balanced against public safety. The protection of Jamaicans' lives and well-being must take precedence over the rights of convicted offenders. Prevention better than cure. Public access to sex offender information can serve as a strong deterrent to such crimes. The MNS National Corrections Services Policy Jamaica states that between 2016 and 2021, Jamaica had an average recidivism or reoffending rate of 41%, which includes crimes related to sex offenses. Making the Sex Offenders Registry public can discourage recidivism. Rehabilitation may not work on every offender. However, deterrence will complement rehabilitation. The current setup leaves victims and potential victims unprotected. We need to arm ourselves with information. This information will protect our most vulnerable. According to the U.S. Department of Justice, sexual offenders often share physical and behavioral challenges, such as trouble controlling emotions, social difficulties, lack of empathy, and deviant sexual urges, making them prone to re-offending. Listen, we are not against rehabilitation, but all habits die hard. Granting full public access to Jamaica's Sexual Offender Registry is crucial for community awareness and safety. The cost of inaction, trauma, loss, and devastation far outweighs the risks. Society's protection must be the top priority. Making the registry publicly available is just one step in addressing sexual violence in Jamaica. Efforts will also focus on strengthening legal frameworks, public education, community interventions to challenge harmful norms and support survivors. Additionally, comprehensive treatment programs, including therapy, medication, and counseling, will help reduce repeat offenses. If you want to protect our society, especially our most vulnerable, you must take action to make the Sex Offender Registry fully public. This will support law enforcement and lead to better deterrence and protection, victim protection, public awareness and safety, and community accountability. Do the right thing.
We thank the second proposition speaker for her contributions to this debate, and now make welcome the second opposition speaker. Hear, hear.
Mr. Speaker, judges, team proposition, and wider Jamaica. This idea of making Jamaica's Sex Offenders Registry fully public is not justice. It is lazy, it is dangerous, and it is leaving an open sore to fester without end. We are imploring you again to take a bird's eye view of the situation beyond seeing the offenders' names on a registry. Again, I want to reiterate that we don't love the idea of having these people lurking in our community. But to make a registry fully accessible means we are being reactive rather than solution-oriented. Team proposition, we notice that you focus a lot on children. What about women and men? Aren't they also victims of sexual crimes? Or are we going to sweep that under the rug? You're talking about privacy. What about the list being fully accessible? The registry is going to ignore human rights for all. Are we as a nation so lawless? Go ahead.
Are you proposing that the reputation of sex offenders is a higher priority than public safety?
No, we're actually saying to you, team proposition, that human rights must be there for all citizens. We do not cherry pick. Sin is sin. Our first speaker clearly just explained some of the cost of benefits, such as a false sense of security, misinformation, counterproductive to rehabilitation and law enforcement efforts. She also highlighted it is the government's job to protect citizens, not the public's duty to police registries.
Point of information.
Go ahead.
Yes, you say that it is law enforcement job, but according to the Child Care and Protection Act, a parent or guardian has the responsibility to protect their children against threats.
Yes, team proposition. They are the first line of protection. But ultimately, we are governed by laws which must be championed by our justice system. A fully accessible public registry would encourage public shaming and exclusion, which actually increases reoffending. There is no evidence that a public registry prevents sexual offenses. Let us continue weighing additional costs against the supposed benefits. It fuels vigilantism. Justice turns into mob rule. It doesn't cut reoffending, but it does damage trust and weaken community police cooperation. It brings serious collateral damage. Can Jamaica really afford the fallout of public access? We would also make recommendations prior to
Point of
concluding.
information?
Publishing the Sex Offender Registry in Jamaica would not protect our children, women, and men. It would put a target on the back of sex offenders and alas, in the hands of the reckless. Mob violence isn't hypothetical, it's historical.
Point of
In
information.
2012, not at this time. Donovan Hazley was chopped to death and his daughter attacked in Trelawney when the mob went in pursuit of his young male relative, who was fingered in the details of 2 boys. No evidence, no trial, just suspicion. And the street decided he should pay because the person responsible for their demise is from the community of Zion and is related to Hazley. Jamaica Gleaner, 2012. In 2021, Levi Chambers was stabbed to death by residents in St. Thomas who mistook him for Davian Bryan, the man who had abducted 2 girls. Bryan was later captured and sentenced, according to Radio Jamaica News 2021. That is what public access triggers in this country. Now imagine his name had been on an official government list. Let's be honest. Do you think it would have made things controlled or more deadly? And this isn't unique to Jamaica, you know. In the United States, a country that champions public sex offender registries, people have been murdered simply for appearing on the list. In 2006, Canadian man Stephen Marshall traveled to Maine, used the state's public registry to find 2 registered offenders, and killed both of them in their homes. Prison Legal News 2007. That list didn't save lives. It signed their death warrants. Now let's discuss and address the myth that these registries reduce reoffending. They don't. Research from Columbia University and the University of Michigan, not at this time, University of Michigan concluded that public notification laws increase the rate of reoffending and not reduce it. The reason? Offenders are driven into isolation, denied employment, denied housing, denied basic survival, until crime becomes more realistic option than compliance. Prescott and Rockoff, 2011. And the countries with the lowest reoffending rates, they don't have public registries. In Finland, where sex offender records are not available to the public, the recidivism rate is 1% for child sexual abuse. In Norway, where registries are used only by professionals, the rate is under 4%.
Point of information.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay.
Instead of creating chaos, here's what we should be doing. Conduct studies to determine what are the causes of sexual offenses. End public shaming. Restrict registry access to those in the justice system with the appropriate training. No rehab, no release. Mandate treatment, monitoring, and assessments. Use risk tiers. Stop treating all offenders the same. Fund survivor care and push reporting of all offenses past and present, and make consent and sex education mandatory nationwide starting young. Fix our household, fix our systems, fix our society. Thank you.
All right. We thank the opposition second speaker for her spirited contributions to the debate, and we'll now enter into the second and final period of cross-examination, where once again we invite opposition to pose questions to proposition, and then we'll flip the arrangements. Opposition.
Proposition, in the age of social media, how do you plan to stop people from sharing names on social media, turning the registry into a viral hit list?
In the age of social media, we think it is more beneficial for the government to publish a list with convicted sex offenders that are actually sex offenders, as opposed to leaving it in the hands of the public to make a list of their own.
There are laws to prevent persons who become nuisance and engaged in harassment.
It's also a crime to harass people via social media under the Cybercrimes Act.
Would you agree that naming and shaming a person on a registry compromises their right to rehabilitation?
No.
Really?
No.
Yes.
Every sex offender registry, the persons are automatically placed on a registry. It's a part of the process.
All right, so you will have one final question, team opposition.
Team proposition. Countries like Germany, Norway, and the UK use restricted access only. What makes you think that Jamaica is more prepared to go fully public?
First of all, the countries that you mentioned have a very starkly different socio-economic reality than Jamaica. Furthermore, in the UK, the access is actually far wider than what our current limited access approach allows. In the UK, any parent can go to any police station and request if a person who has any type of interaction with a child or can have any interaction with a child is on the Sex Offender Registry.
All right. Thank you very much, opposition, for your questions. And now we'll invite propositions to pose their questions.
Opposition, isn't it contradictory to propose increased sentences and the death penalty and then say that you are against vigilantism?
No, we're asking and we're suggesting is in the context of the MOOT. The MOOT is dealing with public registries, and we are expecting that the law enforcement agencies and our justice system would work to determine when these justices are to be served and how they should be.
Question.
Okay. You mentioned some faraway countries, but look at Trinidad and Tobago. Wouldn't you say that their social reality is similar to ours with high rates of sexual violence, and they have published a public registry?
Without vigilantism.
When we look at the cases in Jamaica, we have to apply what is current and what is applicable for Jamaica specifically. There are examples worldwide, and that is why we go to Finland and Japan, for example, as two very good countries that have, or two very good examples of countries that have maintained a registry that is not given to the public.
Final question.
Okay. Opposition, can you put your hand on your chest and say that if your neighbor were a convicted sex offender, you wouldn't want to know?
That's not a part of the MOOT.
Okay. So they also they went and said that they're using recent cases, but they use.
We thank both teams for a very interesting and engaging period of cross-examination. We'll now allow for a 1-minute pause so the reply speaker can put the final touches on their speeches, and then we will continue with the submission from the opposition reply speaker. The 1 minute starts now. And that bell signals the end of 1 minute. So to conclude the debate and side opposition, we invite the opposition reply speaker. Hear, hear.
Adjudicators, my worthy opponents, good day. We on the opposition stand in fierce and unwavering rejection of this motion today. To make Jamaica's offender registry fully accessible, which has been defined to the public, is not justice. It is reckless, reactionary, and dangerous. It may feel like justice conceptually, but in reality, it fosters fear, vigilantism, and long-term instability. Let us be clear, there is no credible evidence, none, that the public sex offender registries reduce sexual abuse or overall crime. What they can reduce is safety, rehabilitation, reintegration, and even basic human rights. Now let us talk about economics and reintegration, because they can't stay in prison forever. Supporting this motion would undermine rehabilitation, limit housing, and block employment for those convicted of sexual offenses. When you take away housing, jobs, and community support, what do you get? You get desperation, you get homelessness, recidivism, and Jamaica up to 2021, best guess, let's not forget, is 40%. And to give you some stats out of that 40%, it's 13% child molesters and 19% rapists that we believe, but it is not quantifiable as yet. Let's be real, anyone publicly branded as a sex offender in Jamaica, especially in a small, tight-knit community, will struggle to find a landlord or an employer. They will be pushed underground with no incentive to comply with supervision or with treatment. That's not safety proposition. That's in fact a breeding ground for repeat offenses. Mr. Speaker, we want to reiterate the question, what is the value of a public sex offender registry? It's not punishment. Japan does not maintain a sex offender registry, neither public nor for law enforcement. This is based on their cultural, legal, and practical considerations. Japan focuses on reintegration and rehabilitation, and the result is less than 10% recidivism. Finland, which is one of the safest countries in the world, has a sex offender registry that is strictly private. Access is limited to the police, the courts, and the vetted employers like schools. There's your protection for the children you're asking about. Their strategy, prevention, not just punishment, education, mental health support, active monitoring, and their result, 1.1% recidivism rate for sex crimes, and one of the lowest in the world, in fact. We're going to contrast that with the United States, home to the largest public sex offender registries. Decades later, there's no significant reduction in their sexual abuse cases, none. In fact, I'll give you another example. In 2005, Michael Mullen tracked down and murdered 2 registrants on the list. Public access doesn't just fail, it can cost lives. 467,634 sexual assaults from the 2023 USA Rape, Abuse, Incest National Network. More than 459,000 were rapes and 63,000 were child sex abuse cases. Proposition, we keep emphasizing child sex abuse. Let's talk about that. Now, recall that over 90% of these cases actually happen, as you say, in the home, and those are known to no one else but persons inside the home. You're not on the registry yet if you have not been convicted. What is the real value of the full accessibility to the public of our offender registry? Why are we not focusing on our control mechanisms? We mentioned UK, Germany, Norway. Theirs are not public, they're restricted access registries. But even UK, if you want to look there, they are currently reassessing and reevaluating and putting more measures in place. So they are learning, improving, and becoming more and more proactive. That's the control mechanism, not public spectacle. And we understand that on Team Opposition. Let's be clear. The MOOT is not asking for a better registry. It's asking for a fully public registry, one that is guaranteed, and there is no guarantee with a fully accessible public registry for reduction in crime and proven risk of vigilantisms, violations, and social collapse. There is no justification for them. Judges, this motion does not offer safety. It offers revenge, vigilantism, and a false sense of security. It does not offer a remedy to the problem of sexual offenses. We are not against registries, but they must be limited access, risk-based, and used by professionals, not the court of public opinion. What we want and need in Jamaica is a solution to the cultural silence, weak institutions, and the broken support systems. We will only protect Jamaica by building a justice system that is smart, measured, prevention-focused, just like Finland. That system works. This motion does not. We oppose it without apology.
We thank the opposition reply speaker for closing out the debate on that side of the House in fine style. And now to do the same, we welcome the proposition reply speaker to close out the debate in totality. Hear, hear.
Thank you and good afternoon. Mr. Speaker, I can only begin to address the number of inaccuracies spewed by the opposition. All conscientious Jamaicans are fatigued with having to relive the trauma of learning that yet another child or another woman has been abducted, raped, and murdered. Jamaicans are tired of facing every single day with dread and despair. As young people would say, the current state of sexual offenses in Jamaica is not giving Vision 2030, it's not giving safe place to raise families, it's giving perpetual nightmare, and it is time to wake up. The status quo of restricted access to the Sex Offenders Registry is clearly not effective at curbing sexual offenses. We are in the month of May, and already there have been 333 reported cases of sexual offenses against children alone. Jamaica has a legal obligation to protect its citizens from sexual violence, yet the current approach to the Sex Offender Registry prioritizes the protection of criminals instead. What kind of a society are we cultivating when convicted sex offenders can feel safer than our women and girls and boys and men resting easily in the sanctity of their homes while they rip people from theirs? Mr. Speaker, the opposition's fear of retaliatory jungle justice in the wake of a public registry is nothing more than the recognition of the fact that civilians are frustrated and lack faith in the justice system, a valid sentiment given the status quo. However, I put it to the House that coupled with improved justice and rehabilitation mechanisms, a fully accessible sex offender registry would be valuable to our society. As mentioned by my second speaker, we believe that the implementation of a sex offender registry must go hand in hand with a more holistic approach to justice. This includes a greater incorporation of restorative justice, community-based therapies, and specialized treatments for offenders into the justice process. Moreover, creating structured and supervised working and living conditions for rehabilitated individuals and robust public education campaigns can significantly reduce the risk of jungle justice. The opposition's argument today further rested on individuals' right to privacy. However, the right to privacy is not absolute and can be limited in circumstances including when national security, public safety, or the prevention of crime are at stake. Mr. Speaker, the anonymity of sex offenders poses a significant risk to public safety. Restricted access is not enough. Everyone deserves to know if their partner, relative, friend, neighbor, taxi driver, or any other service provider is a sex offender. Jamaicans deserve to be armed with the information to protect themselves, their families, and their communities from predators. Jamaicans shouldn't have to wait until they strike again to know that they've struck before. Such as the example provided by the opposition, where the victim of violence was not attacked on release, but on reoffense. Rarely is jungle justice exacted against convicted offenders. Further, they propose that we act on current data, but pose examples of vigilantism from 2008-2012, as opposed to the more recent statistics pointing to numerous cases of sexual offenses against women and girls. Finally, I would like to remind you, members of the House, that our government's primary role is to represent and serve the interests of the people. A petition to publicize the Sex Offenders Registry, published by the Office of the Prime Minister on the 23rd of June 2020, had a goal of 15,000 signatures by the 2nd of August that same year. At closing, 23,609 people had signed that petition. That is 157.38% of the target figure. This demonstrates that this matter is of serious concern to the public and that this motion would have great public support. Further, one of the factors outlined by the Ministry of Local Government and Rural Development in determining whether a decision serves the public interest is verbatim, whether disclosure keeps the public adequately informed of any danger to public health or safety or the environment. Making the Sex Offender Registry accessible to the public does exactly that. So I leave you with one question, the same question posed by my first speaker. If your neighbor were a sex offender, wouldn't you like to know? If your answer is yes, then do the right thing. Support this motion. I thank you.
What is the right thing? Both sides said to do the right thing. Very topical moots. Very, very serious arguments. The MOOT, be it resolved that the Sex Offender Registry should be made accessible to the public, debated by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade and the National Environment and Planning Agency. Ladies and gentlemen, the arguments have been made. Give the teams another round of applause. Thank you, teams. We want to continue the conversations while the judges deliberate, not debate, but deliberate. We ask that you share your comments online on our social media platforms. For those of you on social media, stay tuned. Our judges will take a short break to deliberate and come back with the results of this match. Stay tuned.
All right. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. A round of applause befitting of the match that we just experienced. So, good afternoon again, good morning rather, ladies and gentlemen. The motion that was debated rather was be it resolved that the Sex Offenders Registry should be made fully accessible to the public. In proposition, we had the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, and in opposition, we had the team from the National Environment and Planning Agency, NEPA. Let's get straight into the deliberation. So, in the debate, what we saw happening was a concession on both ends from both teams that sexual offenses are atrocious, outrageously bad, and simply should not happen. The key question then is, in pursuit of solving this problem, does releasing the sexual offenses registry solve the problem? That was the key area being debated. In proposition's world, they argued that we get a reduction in the committal of these offenses by making the registry public. And they told us about Trinidad and Tobago making this move because, like us, what obtained in Trinidad and Tobago was the same thing that currently obtains in status quo in Jamaica, where it is not public, it is restricted to certain agencies such as law enforcement and the court, the judicial system. Right, so they told us that Trinidad and Tobago, they made this switch and they made the sexual offenders registry public, and they told us that it is working for Trinidad and Tobago. Proposition also gave us this idea of why should we make the sexual offenses rather register public. They told us that, listen, when we make this switch, when we make this move, it empowers people in the community. People in the community feel now empowered and they can take proactive steps in protecting their sovereignties and protecting the lives of them, not only themselves but their loved ones. And it gives people just this wealth of knowledge, and we know that knowledge is power, and with that knowledge we can make certain decisions and we can make certain steps. And we accept that, and we credited Team Proposition for that. We get, however, a counter-argument from opposition that this move does not work and we don't get an actual reduction in the occurrence of these incidents from maintaining a public registry. They cited, and this is opposition, countries such as Japan, Norway, and Finland, who doesn't have a sexual offenders registry, and they have low number of offenses. Right, so that was an interesting idea, an interesting contestation in the judge's mind. And we had to sit and we had to decide which world makes more sense, which world was more convincing. What really turned the debate, though, for us as a panel of adjudicators was the analysis as to why overall this move does not work. Opposition rather, they refer to it as the costs. So they tell us that when we make the sexual offenders register public, we get two benefits, and they listed the benefits to us. But in contrast to these benefits, there are 5 costs that are associated with it. Right? They tell us that 1, it leads to a false sense of safety that is intertwined with vigilantism. They tell us that this promotes misinformation, and ultimately what it does is that it leads to a lack of rehabilitation, or it undermines rehabilitation processes. These claims, however, we as a panel of adjudicators feel were not fulsomely engaged with by side proposition. Right? So we had to credit these ideas that were proffered by side opposition, and ultimately that decided the outcome of the match. So the match ended with side proposition and 261 points, and the side opposition emerged the victors with 273 points, and the best speaker for this debate also comes from the winning team, and that is the second speaker on side opposition. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. If you have any further questions or concerns, you can see us before the next match gets underway. I'll now hand over back to Tomika.
Ladies and gentlemen, very, very thought-provoking debate. Give the teams another round of applause. Congratulations to both teams on a job well done. Thank you so much to our teams for being here. Thank you to you, our viewers online, for being engaged with us. Please stay tuned as another match is coming up, another exciting match in this round where the Statistical Institute of Jamaica and the Judiciary of Jamaica will be taking on the MOOT. Be it resolved that the belief that customer service is always right does more harm than good in Jamaica's public sector. Please stay tuned. That match begins at 11:45 a.m. Thank you and stay tuned.